Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining this first plenary session of the second day of the Level EEI conference. We will be waiting a few minutes for participants to join, especially from the previous plenary presentation. Thank you for waiting. For those of you who have just joined, welcome to the first plenary debate of today. We will take a few more minutes as people join this session. Thank you for waiting. Thank you all for joining. We'll give it one more minute and then I propose we start with this session. Okay, so let's get started. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first plenary debate of the second day of this Level EEI conference. And today's debate is organized by WWF, and we will be discussing how to best embed sustainability in the retail investment strategy that the European Commission aims to present next year. My name is Joost Mulder. I run 𝗿𝗲𝘀, an EU public affairs consultancy where I advise environmental, human rights and shareholder NGOs on sustainable finance. And on today's panel from snowy Brussels, I'm joined by Andrea Liesenfeld, who is Deputy Head of Unit in DG FISMA, responsible for retail finance, by 𝗀𝗃𝗃𝗀𝗃, a member of the European Parliament from Finland, from the European People's Party, 𝗀𝘂𝘀𝘁. Then we have Jasper de Meyer, who is Financial Services Team Leader at BEUC. We have 𝗍𝗵𝗀𝗀𝘀𝗁 from Candriam, and Sébastien Godinot from the WWF European Policy Office working on sustainable finance. I will introduce the speakers in a bit more detail as we go through them. We have a bit less than 90 minutes for this session, so the speakers will speak for a maximum of 10 minutes each. So that leaves us ample time for a very generous Q&A session. For the Q&A, I think most of you will already be familiar with the platform. There is a bar on the right-hand side where you can post your questions in Q&A. We will not be able to let you in with video and audio, but I have a few assistants here, especially Mathilde Nonon, who you can see probably from the WWF team, who will be helping me collecting the questions as they come in for the Q&A. So don't hesitate to put them forward. So without further ado, I'm happy to give the floor to Andrea Liesenfeld, the Deputy Head of Unit of the Retail Financial Services in DG FISMA. Ms. Liesenfeld previously worked on interinstitutional matters, fundamental freedoms and IP rights and holds a PhD from the 𝗀𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀 Universiteit in München and a Master of Law from the College of Europe in Bruges. Ms. Liesenfeld will be speaking, I hope, about the forthcoming retail finance strategy, as I've mentioned, because it's there, I think, that Europe has a great opportunity to embed sustainability into the retail product sphere. Andrea, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and hello, good morning to everyone. I'm glad to be here, and I'm not just saying this, but I'm here to get all your ideas. As you just asked me to say a little bit about the background, which I'm very happy to do. The background of the retail investment strategy. So. We have, of course, in Europe, you're all aware, relatively high saving rates, but relatively low investment rates. This is a problem. This is a problem in many ways for CMU, recovery, sustainable investment. But this might also be a big problem for consumers, because they might not get the best deal, and they might not be able to save all they need for retirement. And then we have a lack of trust by many consumers as well. Financial services investment is considered as quite complex, and people don't necessarily trust it, and they might also not always get the best deal out of it. So against this background, we have said in the CMU action plan from last year that we are going to develop a retail investment strategy. Now we'll present this next year. So meaning next year, so we still have some time. And that this means we are still in the evidence gathering phase. So what we are looking at, of course, is relatively clear. Our aims are we would like to encourage more retail investor participation on the one hand, but we also want to make sure we create a framework of trust, and that ensures kind of fair outcomes for consumers, for retail investors. And that's, of course, part of what we are going to be talking today. We need to see that the framework is adapted to new challenges like digitalization and sustainability. So what we have said is we look at it from the retail investor perspective. And we have taken a relatively broad perspective. So we have you've seen this in the public consultation. We've started out looking at from the financial literacy aspect over disclosures to inducements, suitability questions, back all the way for the retail investor's journey to redress questions. Now, as I said in the beginning, we are still very much in the evidence gathering phase. So I am looking we're still looking for ideas and evidence from all sides. But we've of course started. You've seen it. We had launched in May an open public consultation, which was a very broad exercise with about 120 questions, I believe, and we got a lot of answers as well, a lot of interest in that, more than 180 replies into that, mostly from industry, but also, of course, some consumer organizations. A lot of you have participated, NGOs, some authorities, but very largely also industry. With, of course, the colleagues, I wasn't able to do this all myself, have, of course, looked into this very intensively, lots of work. What was quite interesting in the beginning, when you looked at where stakeholders see the biggest chance to do something. A lot of course, again, industry said an important aspect would be to continue working on financial literacy. I can imagine that some of you might see this differently, but that was one relatively interesting aspect, I thought. So that was of course one strand of the evidence gathering, but we've commissioned also a very large scale study where we are still waiting for the results. We hope that we are going to get them relatively soon. This study looks at disclosure issues, largely at inducement and suitability issues, with some mystery shopping and many things. But we are unfortunately still waiting for that evidence part. And we have asked the ESAs for advice. So we've asked ESMA, we have asked EIOPA, and as well as the Joint Committee on PRIPS. So the current planning is that the intention is obviously as with the usual disclaimer, if provided we have a positive impact assessment, that we would come out with legislative proposals by the end of next year. So we still have a moment to go. And of course, as I said, the ESA call for advice, we are only going to get if everything goes according to plan at the end of April. If there aren't going to be any delays. Now, sustainable finance, as I said, this is one of the aims. The core aims are, of course, to encourage retail investor and ensure a framework, but sustainability, of course, adapting the framework, it's a very, very important aspect as well. We need to ensure that we get sustainable investment, and there is also a lot of interest from the retail investor side for sustainability investment. Now, a lot of work has already been done by our colleagues on this. I mean, you might know this much better than I do. Taxonomy, all the work on corporate disclosures, recently also on suitability. A lot more is ongoing, the green bond standard, work on eco-label, on financial literacy as well, with the competence framework. But yes, it's clear we are not at the end. And as I said already before, I'm very happy to listen to you, what suggestions you have, what you think, where the crucial aspects are that we still need to tackle. As I said, we're still looking at it, so no decision has been made in no way yet. Therefore, please let me know.
Very much, Andrea, for this good overview. I know you're not in an easy position to talk about all the things that we can be expecting by the end of next year. I know you're in a phase of collecting evidence and collecting data, so it's greatly appreciated you're here to hear from us. Now, a technical question. I'm not sure that our next speaker, 𝗂𝗂𝘃𝗀𝗃, has managed to join the platform. Seems to be a negative there. So what I propose we do is we move on to the next speaker and we bring in 𝗂𝗂 as soon as she can. So the next speaker is Jasper de Meyer, who is Financial Services Team Leader at BEUC. He has worked on a variety of retail financial services legislation, always with a principal focus on investor protection. He's a member of the Securities and Markets Stakeholder Group at ESMA. The previous speaker already mentioned that the European supervisors are providing advice to the European Commission about how the retail work is currently doing. And he represents BEUC, which is importantly an umbrella consumer group, bringing together 46 different independent consumer organizations from across 32 countries. So that's broader than the EU. For that, Jasper, I'm happy to move over to you. Perhaps to give you one provocative question, which is that now we've clearly got this wide horizontal retail focus on the table. Is this what you wanted? Is this what BEUC has been campaigning for a decade and is now happy to see emerge? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Joost, for your question, and thank you also for inviting BEUC, the European Consumer Organization, to present in this panel on how to embed sustainability into the retail investment strategy. BEUC responded to the consultation that was launched by the European Commission over the summer, and we indeed believe that further policy measures need to be taken in order to truly embed sustainability into any future retail investment strategy that will be adopted by the European Commission. I think consumers are increasingly interested in investing sustainably, in taking out sustainable investment products. I think over the COVID-19 pandemic, we've witnessed an increase in the interest of consumers into taking out investment products. And many for the first time might have taken out a sustainable investment fund during the COVID-19 pandemic. BEUC thinks that a supportive framework needs to be developed in order to help consumers take effective investment decisions, including as it relates to sustainability criteria. And I think in this regard, we very much welcome the European Commission rules introduced earlier this year that will soon require all financial advisors in the European Union to assess the sustainability preferences of their clients when taking investment decisions. And I think this is a really important step forward that the Commission has taken. But beyond this, we think that some further measures are still needed in order to support consumers wishing to take sustainable investment decisions. And here I want to touch on a few points that we believe are necessary. I think one of the first thing is that as financial advisors will soon be required to assess the sustainability preferences of their clients, it's crucial for them to be adequately trained and knowledgeable about sustainability issues. And a survey that was carried out by 𝗍𝗲𝗍𝗃 last year in the UK found that UK financial advisors, over half, had received no ESG training at all and had limited sustainability knowledge. And so we think it's crucial that during any future review of MiFID II and the IDD, the Insurance Distribution Directive, that there should be clear minimum rules ensuring that financial advisors are knowledgeable, are competent, with a specific component dedicated to their sustainability knowledge and to their knowledge and training about sustainability issues. Already in some EU member states, for instance in France, the French AMF has already strengthened its professional certification requirements for financial advisors, including as it relates to sustainability issues. And we think that these rules need to be adopted on an EU-wide basis. Beyond this, I think the European supervisory authorities should also work on developing guidance or template questionnaires for financial advisors in order to be able for them to assess the sustainability preference of clients in a meaningful way. And we urge more action to be taken in that regard as well. Turning to one other measure that we think is needed is also everything related to disclosure. Obviously, the SFDR has entered into force, and financial products are now required to be more transparent about how sustainable they are. However, we think that there needs to be more sustainability information within the key information documents that are provided to retail investors. And consumers, they really need access to simple disclosure labels in order to help guide their decision making. And for the moment, the key information documents which consumers consult before taking investment decisions, they lack sustainability information. And so one of our recommendations was that within the key ID documents, you need simple disclosures. For instance, a colored rating system where, based on the energy label, where green investment funds or the most sustainable investments funds would receive an A rating, whereas the least sustainable would receive a red G rating. I think simple disclosures that can guide consumers' decision making are really critical and should be addressed in any future retail investment strategy. Then one other point I think that consumers need is access to independent comparison tools. And I think in many EU countries, consumers do not have access to independent comparison tools that allow them to easily compare between investment products, including comparison tools that rank financial institutions and investment products based on their sustainability criteria. Now, in some EU countries, like in Belgium, there are NGOs like the Fair Finance Guide that provide consumers with easy rankings of how sustainable their investment products are. And we think that the European Commission should consider supporting initiatives like this across the EU to give consumers the ability to easily compare between products. I think the last thing that I want to touch upon in my presentation is potentially also the most controversial one, and that is the issue of inducements and the quality of financial advice that is given to consumers in the EU. So in 2018, BEUC launched a campaign called The Price of Bad Advice. And this is a website that we created in 2018. And it's a web map of mis-selling scandals that have affected consumers in the EU, including retail investors. I think we've collected over 50 different mis-selling cases from over 15 different European member states. What our web map shows is that the quality of financial advice given to consumers in the EU is often still very poor. I think the retail investment market, according to the European Commission's latest consumer scoreboard, is one of the worst performing sectors for consumers in the EU. And for us, the issue of inducements or the commissions that are paid to financial advisors are a core issue here. Commissions, the payment of commissions to financial advisors leads to conflicts of interest and leads to poor quality financial advice. And there are two countries in the EU, in Europe, the UK and the Netherlands, which have already banned the payment of inducements to financial advisors. And what we see in these countries is that the quality of financial advice has improved, and financial advisors, they increasingly recommend simpler products to their clients. They increasingly recommend with fewer conflicts of interest. And we think that the reforms in these countries are working very well for consumers in the UK and the Netherlands. And so the last recommendation that we would have for the European Commission is that they consider in its retail investment strategy implementing an EU-wide ban on the payment of inducements to financial advisors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jasper, for being very broad yet concise. And thank you for reminding us indeed of the fee issue. I think some of the most recent retail asset management products, such as the PEP with the fee cap, are interesting in this context, and I hope we can get to that in the Q&A in about half an hour from now. I will now introduce Sirpa Pietikäinen. I hope you're on, Sirpa. Thank you for joining. I know there were some technical issues. So we went to Jasper first, and now we are able to hear from you. I'm afraid you might have missed part of the Commission's introduction of the retail finance strategy due for the end of next year, but this is exactly what I would like you to elaborate on, if you can. You know, do you think this is sufficient? Do you think the Commission is making a good step towards a horizontal action plan and sort of taking the perspective of the consumer first? So before I give you the floor, very briefly, for those of you who don't know, Ms. Pietikäinen, an MEP for the Finnish Kokoomus Party since 2008, a background in economics actually, but a very big environmental expert also, given that she served as a Minister for the Environment in the 1990s in Finland. Has been an MEP since 2008 after a career in local politics and a member of the Finnish National Parliament. And she currently sits on the Econ and Environment committees, amongst others. And this is, of course, very interesting because it brings together the joint focus on sustainability and finance, which I think is very important in this debate. So, Sirpa, the floor is yours. You're good. We can hear a bit of it.
Thank you so much, and sorry for the delayed coming in, but as you said, I did have some technical issues on joining online, but I hope you can hear me now and the connection is okay. Then this is very crucial point what we are discussing now, and I'm very happy to have all of your advice, not only today but then later on in the discussions. And let me introduce more than sort of a direct answers, these kind of questions, what I think that we have in the retail investment side. Let me start first what I heard Jasper saying, and this is the information for the retail investors needs to be clear and easily understandable. And it needs to cover the whole range of investments. And so I tend to think that this kind of a sort of a traffic-like system, or what we have in energy efficiency of appliances, would be very workable. So you have the green, you have the yellow, and you have the red. And if necessary, in the longer run, you can subdivide these green lighting systems further in subcategories. Okay. To have that kind of information in different kind of investment products, and we have to bear in mind that I think that in the longer run it would need to be in the shares, it would need to be in structured financial products. You might know very well the BEUC legislation, that what we have on packaged retail investment goods. It would need to be in prospectus guidelines and so on. So it needs to be overarching, and I think that we should cover the insurance side as well in the longer run, and why not lending and the banking system. And to have that kind of information to create the category, and this is actually the problem with the taxonomy and CSR reporting system, you need to have a very sound reporting system and calculation system as a basis, and the data for that. It would need to be European level, and in the longer run globally set, with the natural capital accounting system that is developed in DG Environment, and that is developed in the UN Environment and in other fields. It would need to entail, of course, the social factor when we are there, to have a proper indicators and analysis that are comparable. And it would need to cover all the industries, and especially this comes very important because in many sectors, just to pick up the textiles, now you have very different kind of methodologies. Some of them have very short and narrow life cycle analysis. So it is basically from door to door of the factory, and it's easier for you to claim to be a green. Well, textiles is a good example, or electronics about this. And then you would need to have this kind of a compulsory LCA methodology. So you would need to have that methodology, how you count the CO2 emission, the natural capital, the emissions or whatever, and the methodology, how you accumulate it on the whole chain of production and selling and possible reuse and all that. So this is what we still talk more than what we do. And so I just would like to lay this, that before you do this, before you know what you are talking about, actually the problem is that you can't rely on the information, and especially you can't rely on the comparability. Is this mobile phone or that mobile phone invested on this, on that construction sector, better or worse? Okay. And then when we come to the information, I think that we should have, as said, the two relevant ends. And now we are talking in taxonomy, for example, a lot. So how you define the green? The green should be the substantially better part than the average of the industry. And then the special requirement that meets the existing and upcoming environmental and sustainability needs. Because it might be the case that in the industry you might have the best of the class activities, but still that wouldn't be enough for to combat the climate change, or to combat the biodiversity loss. Just to name one is the forest management, what we are debating. You can certainly find what is the best in the class, but is that good enough, adequate enough to combat the biodiversity loss? Not even close of that, not even the best of it. So that sort of agreement should be rather stringent. And what is on my mind, even more important, is this red end, that is the do no significant harm. And quite obviously, there are that kind of issues like investments on fossil fuels, and devastating mining operations that put harm on several sectors or sustainability, social aspects, biodiversity, and so on. But while we are developing the methodology, what is the big risk is that because it's difficult, you have a narrow green area, let's say about 5% of the products. And then you have almost non-existent side of red. And basically you would go to retail investor saying, well, these are more or less yellow, the whole of the stuff what we have. What can you say about the counting activity or printing activity or digitalization or this or that? And then it actually wouldn't be helpful for the consumer. And in worst case, it could create that kind of a bubble effect on very narrow and make a green end. And on the green end, that's why we need these methodologies, the data and the comparability, and it should be throughout the production and selling and retail chains. Just wanted to light up this problem because I think that we are not even close on yet getting there. So how to go further? Besides this data, I think that there should be this kind of a system that benefits at least 4 sources of information, as far as we do not have this perfect information world. The one is the upcoming regulation about the EU single access point, the idea of having for listed companies a single consumer access point where you can find the financial data and the sustainability data. And there, if we could create that kind of a sort of a lighting system on sustainability side, these are the worst of the class. These are mediocre, and these are sort of best of the class. And please be reminded, if you are best in the class, that doesn't always mean that you are sustainable, but at least you could differentiate. And then that should be linked on those investment products, and especially important that is when you have this package, multi-layer products and different kind of funds where you the people tend to retail investors tend to invest. And if you do not open up and with this kind of a sort of a color scheme showing that okay, there's dots of green inside there, but the biggest part is yellow, and the very strong in some of the parts of the investment. That should have the information for the retail investor. This fund have very nice green products and slices of a green products. Let's just hypothetical example to pick up a shell. But if they have a substantial lot of a shell shares, the majority of it actually would be fossil. And that's why the sort of these color schemes should actually be red. So that is the technology. I hope that the Commission can sort of benefit the experts and sort of think how you sort of open up the packaged goods so that it really gives the information what is needed. Then the second point there is that it's so easy to take the yellow, I do not know, as this kind of a default option and say, look, what can you do then if you do not know? And what I've been proposing there already in taxonomy, didn't go through, is that, well, in the financial side, you do not take no information as neutral. You take it as a risk, because all what you do not know is a risk for the retail investor. I do not know what is the profitability of the company. I do not know how much risky capital it has. I do not know how debt it is. Of course it is a risky. So we should have actually this kind of a label. So within the yellow, you would separate what is, in quotes, genuinely neutral. I would say that, for example, this kind of a consulting activities mainly is going to be far ahead in the future neutral. You don't change the world by using a bit less or more green energy substantially better, even though of course it's good if you can differentiate there too. But then again, that part of the yellow sort of in betweens that you do not have the information, you should have the warning label, this kind of a, this is a do not know area. We do not know about these companies, and then if they are a part of the retail investment offer, it's a warning. This is unknown territory. And just the fact that it would exist, I think, would sort of speed up substantially the financial actors to eliminate that kind of a product and that matter. Then that would push the real economy industries and companies to reveal and give that information, because otherwise they would be labeled as unsecure investments. Okay, what else then about this information? The access point. Then the second one would be the cooperation, what we can learn or how do we can we benefit the ratings and rating systems of international raters. I hope that we could have a European regulation about credit rating agencies to put them the obligation to have the sustainability ratings as they do have the financial ratings. And already the exchanges are developing and having pretty good systems. So we should sort of link that information on that ESAP access point. Technicalities how to do it, there's the questions, and then the information of or it could be a separate information site of that kind of a non-profitable organizations using and benefiting these, plus then the last point where the access to information is of course the different rating systems, reporting systems, and sustainability standards that we do have nowadays already existing. There's about 250, but 25 of them most relevant, and as you might know, they are working together to sort of codify their activities on voluntary basis globally, and to have the reporting and standards and methodologies on the same basis, and that would be very valid. And then I think that because before we have this kind of a perfect sort of a environmental sustainability calculation, life cycle calculation methodology, it might take 10 years or even longer, and we can't sit on our hands and wait that to happen. And then before we are there, we could create with that kind of access of information, that kind of a basis where then we can draw the sort of a lighting system for the retail investor, that this is what we know about what really the product entails, and what is the proportions of green, not known, neutral, and then environmentally risky investments.
Super. I hate to interrupt you. Please wrap up. No, I don't want to. Okay. Are you done? No? You want to make a fourth point, or did I miss it?
No. I was concluding here.
But you were very provocative, which is why I think we, without technical problems, we would have preferred you to come in before. But thank you for your intervention and for staying around a bit, as I think we have a few questions addressed to you, and we should get to Q&A in about 20 minutes. I take 2 points from your intervention. One, I think, is thank you for reminding us that some consumers might be more interested in avoiding the bad than in wanting to finance the good. There is a lot of talk about financing the transition, and some policymakers love to put that burden on consumers, which perhaps is not enough. Perhaps that burden needs to be elsewhere as well. So we need to cater for different forms of consumers. And I take another point away from you, which is dear to me as well, which is that that consumers need what I call comparability within an asset class, within a product group, but also between product groups. And that means that we need to more harmonize these disclosure documents particularly, but also the distribution rules, as Jasper has mentioned, between the different EU systems, between the different regulations that regulate investment products. And that makes a nice bridge to our next speaker, which is who is 𝗍𝗵𝗀𝗀𝗃 from Candriam. He's been head of ESG development there since April 2020, previously head of ESG client portfolio management. As a member of the team of ESG analysts and portfolio managers, his role is to deliver their unique blend of sustainability credentials and market wisdom. He's previously worked at Sycamore Asset Management and at Erste Bank Asset Management. Started his career with BNP-Paribas in London on the equity derivative structuring desk, so very familiar with how products are structured. I'm not sure that's only for professional investors, David, but also for retail investors, perhaps. And as you are the industry representative on this panel, perhaps you can elaborate on what consumers actually are nowadays asking for. Is the change going to come from you, from fund managers changing their offer, perhaps under pressure from regulation? Or is it because indeed, as we probably hope, consumers are changing their behavior and are asking for different products?
Thank you, and thanks for having me today on this panel. Good morning, everyone. Yes, very interesting topic, and one that doesn't lend itself very easily to oversimplification. The main point I would like to try to convey to you today is that investing is a complex activity, that any standard, any label, any traffic light system, whatever comes up next, is and remains a very crude attempt to simplify something that is mostly a collection of human endeavors. We call it companies that try to do things, and some of them have a more or less a pure purpose, but it is not always easy when you are, as an investor, to say this is a good company, this is a bad company, this is a sustainable company, this is an unsustainable company. Everything we have been doing over the last few years has been to try to come up with metrics and indicators and data that would allow us to get a better sense of that. But this, to this day, and I think for some time in the future, will remain an imperfect endeavor. And the results of that will still be quite controversial. Talking from the investor perspective, one of the things we are the most acutely aware of by interacting with investors is that there is no such thing as a common understanding of what a sustainable investment product is or what it is not. SFDR does not provide an overall definition of what a sustainable product is. Some national regulators have made an attempt at defining what it is for them in their market. Sometimes it just involves removing a certain share of the investment universe in the name of ESG, of sustainability, like in France. Others have also decided that sustainable meant excluding some activities that they deem to be socially unacceptable. but there is no, at this stage, really universal or Europe-wide standard. The taxonomy is a standard in terms of whether an activity is contributing to one of the 6 European environmental objectives, but a company is often a collection of activities. There will be very few companies with 100% alignment with the taxonomy criteria, and we do not invest only in Europe, but we invest a lot outside Europe, where the taxonomy does not apply at this stage. So consumers some have a very ethical driven approach to sustainable investing, or to what they expect. For them, it's mostly avoiding some activities they think they don't want to support or to want to be exposed to. So that's very understandable, of course. So then it's very clear. It's exclusion based. For other consumers, they want to really finance for example, energy transition. They want that their capital, their investment is helping to achieve for example, the reduction by 55% of European greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. They want to bring their share to that. That's also totally understandable. Others are a bit more militant and they might want to also use their voice to force companies to accelerate the transition. So that's also something that investment managers like ourselves can do. But there's this panopticon of different meaning and expectations, and we do not provide one product for each retail investor. So we have packaged products that attempt to answer all of these sometimes diverging expectations in one single shelf, and that of course can lead to to if a customer was very much coming from an ethical point of view and finds a product that is mostly based looking at it in a way to proactively finance some activities, but without necessarily avoiding others. What's key, of course, is education. Has been mentioned before. The risk is that because suddenly the finance becomes or is meant to become more sustainable, that people, especially retail investors, might understand that as finance becoming less complex and investing becoming a more straightforward and understandable activity, or that now there is no more financial risk. Financial risk is not going away, for example. So what we said in the past, that investors should be advised, they should know what they are stepping into, remains completely accurate when we move into sustainable finance. And so that means that intermediation remains, I think, an important topic. And the training of the intermediaries is essential. And we need to add to their training a good part on ESG. Candriam, we created the Candriam Academy. It's a free e-learning platform to learn about ESG. Others have done the same. I think this is really helping in bringing up that education level. Also, because when you look at what investors expect, again, about this, my thread around complexity, let's take some examples. I like really to bring things down to real life. As an investor, as a retail investor, what is a good pharmaceutical company for me? Is it one that is financing and developing vaccinations against COVID? Or is it a pharmaceutical company with a stellar governance and the best testing practices? Because these might not be the same. And yet you want to be sustainable. So which one is the most sustainable? If you invest in car companies, which car company is the most sustainable? The young company that is making 100% electric vehicles, but what nobody is allowed to be unionized, or the established car companies employing hundreds of thousands of unionized people, but still making mostly petrol cars and investing aggressively in making electric? Which one should I hold? You tell me. You are the client. Which one is the most sustainable for you? And I could go on and on with such examples that illustrate that it's not because you end up with a traffic light or a rating for an investment product that looks very simple, very clear, supposedly very understandable, that it tells you anything about the underlying reality. And I think we are now really at risk within the industry of settling for this kind of very, very straightforward, overly simplifying ways to measure sustainability. And the final example I would take is around divestment. So as an investor, should we divest from all oil and gas companies today? Because they only represent about 4% of our overall investment universe. So selling all our shares in oil and gas companies is not infeasible. But does it achieve anything? If we do that, will there be less CO2 emissions tomorrow in Europe? Or shall we keep these shares, but use our votes to vote against the management that is not ambitious enough, use our influence to try to push these managers and CEOs of oil and gas companies to make more aggressive commitments towards decarbonizing? Again, it's not always straightforward, not as straightforward as people would believe. So yeah, just a word of caution here, and it's my final word about the complexity and the risk of oversimplifying, based, of course, on sometimes also shaky data.
Yeah. Thank you very much, David, for this broad overview, and for reminding us indeed that whilst we're all consumers, we probably all have different definitions of what is sustainable and ethical and the right thing to do, and what we personally want to do with our money. The examples you mentioned of pharmaceutical companies in the car industry, I think they all show the need for granular disclosure, which you made clearly, perhaps indirectly. And I do hope that for some, in one way or another, we can have the best of both worlds. We can have synthetic condensed indicators for those who are happy to rely on that, while providing the same granularity in the choices to consumers who have a very specific investment profile. But of course, this is hard to squeeze into a 3-4 page key information document, if that is the only document we can assume consumers will read. So thank you also for reminding the audience that it's very important we invest in education of intermediaries, and all the work that your company has been doing on that so far. I think the next speaker can actually very well pick up on this, including on the last question. You put the dilemma of divesting or not, or engaging. The next and last speaker for the panel is Sébastien Godinot from the WWF European Policy Office. He's worked in the environmental sector for over 20 years and is currently the economist at the WWF Brussels office and head of the Sustainable Finance Unit. Has an expertise in public and private finance, in budgetary and subsidy issues, in the wider issue of sustainable economy, and is one of the voices out there in the decision-making community as a member of the EU platform on sustainable finance, as well as the 𝗍𝗃 task force on non-financial reporting standards, which some speakers have referred to, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which is relying heavily on the preparatory work that 𝗍𝗃 is doing at the moment to then actually define what is sustainability and what needs to be reported. Sébastien, go ahead.
Thanks a lot, Joost. Can you hear me well? Good. I'll first take a step back about why we are discussing these issues and why we need to transition the whole financial system to sustainability, including, of course, the retail market that is a critical chunk of it, in our view. We need to move the entire economy to sustainability, because there are sustainability challenges we face which are becoming such that our system risks to have different types of collapses. The most visible one, the most discussed one these days are likely the climate ones. We are increasingly nearing tipping points and climate disruptions. It's becoming increasingly clear. This is in turn skyrocketing climate-related financial risks for any type of investor, institutional or retail. And there is no escape, especially for large investors. They shall invest in the planet, and if the entire economy goes to chaos, they will be impacted extremely negatively. So there's a requirement to shift toward a sustainable economy, and that implies also shifting to a sustainable financial system. There are three types of elements we need to put together extremely quickly now, because we have been procrastinating far too much in the last decade, unfortunately. So we need to radically accelerate the transition. The first thing is to grow the green niche on green finance. This is currently very small. We will know very soon with the taxonomy how much of the economy is deemed green. Estimates feel this is around 5% of the economy, so we need to grow this green niche very fast. The International Energy Agency, for example, says that we need to triple renewable investments in the next few years, up to 2030 at least. Second, we need to transition the whole economy towards something more sustainable. And third, we need to stop investing in harmful activities. We need to stop putting more fuel in the fire, very clearly. And we are not there yet at all. So now linking back to the retail investment discussion and how we can embed this sustainability requirement in EU retail finance, and more precisely in EU in EU retail finance policy. I'll raise a couple of issues. Many have been already raised by other speakers, so I'll be quicker in them. We developed, as the 𝗲𝗶𝗹 with other organizations, 10 recommendations for the EU retail investment strategy. They're structured in two parts. One is focusing on distributors, the sale and distribution process. The other one is focused on product features and the origination of financial products. And for the first cluster on these sales and distribution processes, and a key element is to monitor whether financial advisors properly ask their retail clients about their sustainability preferences. Jasper mentions it. There's very likely more granular guidance required from 𝗲𝗲𝘀𝗀 in particular, for example, with a template questionnaire, to make sure financial advisors will ask retail clients their sustainability preferences the best possible way, because as mentioned by David, this is not a very simple and easy issue. Another element is to require minimum sustainability competences to financial advisors, and we need an EU-wide minimum level of requirements, as mentioned by Jasper as well. Next issue is to align the interests of financial advisors with those of the retail clients. And again, Jasper mentions it with a ban of inducements to financial advisors. Next issue is require that sustainability denominated funds are systematically proposed as a default retail option. This in our view as 𝗲𝗶𝗹, this does not come alone. I mean, it requires other conditions to be met to shift to this new normal. Currently, we have an opt-in system only, where it is each and every retail investor that has to explicitly ask for a sustainable product. And we think, given that there is an overwhelming majority, 60-70% at least in any study, of retail investors who want to invest sustainably, they want to put their money in sustainable products when they are asked properly. Given this overwhelming majority, we think we need to shift to an opt-out system where, by default, the proposed funds for retail investors are sustainable products, and they would, of course, have the room to opt out if they disagree with us with that default option. The next option, the next recommendation is to move to empower retail investors to properly identify financial products that best match their sustainability preferences, using fintech with minimum requirements on disclosure, on sustainability criteria, etc. Jasper's mentioned Fair Finance Guide in Belgium. 2Degree Investing Initiative also developed a new website, My Fair Money, assessing this climate performance of thousands of retail funds available in the EU market. Now moving to the second part, the product features, the origination of financial products. There are other elements that need to be taken into account. The first one is clearer, more accessible information on sustainability for each and every financial product, accessible to retail investors, standardized. It's not easy, but we truly believe it is feasible. It may not be perfect. It will have to simplify a few things, but this is absolutely necessary. Otherwise, retail investors are lost. If I take if I make a comparison, in the food market, there is the organic label. The organic label does not include every sustainability issue in the agricultural and food system. It's essentially on not using chemical products. It's more than that, especially for livestock. But that's essentially the starting point of the organic label. It does not include everything, but still, this is extremely useful to drive the market to more sustainability, at least on that issue. And it is trusted by consumers, so it has a real impact in the market. The next issue is to make sure there are minimum standards for sustainability denominated funds. Positively, the Commission raised this issue in its recently published new sustainability finance strategy, published in July. So we are eager to discuss this in more details and how to make this work, especially with SFDR. There is then the need to ensure retail investor engagement, notably at cross-border level, because it's still very tricky for a retail investor, for example, based in France, to do engagement for if it buys a product from Germany. So this, there are obstacles for this that must be removed. A specific other issue is to finalize the EU eco-label for financial product. It's been waiting too long in the queue of the green finance products in the making. So it must be finalized as soon as possible so that retail investors can start using it. And last but not least, there's a requirement that sustainability impacts of green funds, sustainable funds, etc., are evidenced. And this is a very key issue. We need to make sure there is impact of green products, sustainable products, ESG products, etc., in the real economy, and that has a positive impact on reducing harm or on improving contributing to the environmental sustainability goals we have in the EU. And there's a last issue I'd like to mention that is related to this, which is the greenwashing risk. This is very clear. There's lots of greenwashing currently in the EU market with the different sustainable or green funds. A lot of greenwashing. And greenwashing raises three major concerns. The first one is that it's not accelerating the sustainable transition. There's no real impact of such products. They might even be counterproductive. It might lead to more harm in the real economy. The second issue is that this is misleading retail investors, buying these funds, believing that they will make a positive contribution. And the third problem is that it is decredibilizing the sustainable finance agenda, the green finance market as a whole, which is very problematic because it tarnishes the confidence. It creates mistrust between the retail investors, financial advisors, and so on and so forth. So this must be avoided, and this is where the forthcoming retail investment strategy has a major role to play. And I stop there.
Thank you very much, Sébastien, for your very provocative, bold statement that perhaps sustainable products should be the default product, which then, of course, begs the question, what is sustainable? And I would like to continue on that issue, starting the Q&A. I think you also made a very fair point that sustainability needs to be demonstrated. Those of you who've been around in retail finance longer know the controversy around, for instance, the use of past performance in key information documents, vis-a-vis the use of future-looking scenarios, and particularly in PRIPS, this is still an ongoing discussion, if not a fight, between different schools of thought. And I would argue that definitely the same applies to sustainability information. So I hear your call that this should be documented. I think we have some technical problems with 𝗀𝗲. I see her in the participant list, but not as a panelist, so we'll try to remedy that. But meanwhile, I have two questions from the Q&A that I think are best answered by Jasper from BEUC, because it would also allow you to comment on what has been said so far about the different profiles of consumers out there. So these questions were both raised by 𝗀𝗂𝘀𝘁𝗁. One is how you would rate sustainability in the label. I take it that that means how do you define sustainability? What indicators would you use? And then the second question is, given that retail investors have different objectives, as we've seen, how can we sort of group them nevertheless into different sustainability profiles? Perhaps also think of the industry strategies that David has mentioned that you could align to, such as exclusion or screening. Can you get that, Jasper, before we move to the rest of the panel?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, perhaps starting with the last question first, which is that there are many different potential approaches that investment fund managers can take when creating products, and there's many different strategies and best-in-class strategies where, or alternatively negative screening practices, or another approach is obviously shareholder engagement. So there's many different approaches that can be chosen. And I think the key thing that we would say that it's really then the role of the financial advisors to be able to effectively during the distribution process advise consumers and assess their sustainability preferences in a concrete way in order to assess which of these strategies match most closely with what the consumer is interested in investing in. And so we would really speak about making sure that financial advisors are educated about different investment strategies that are out there, and making sure that there are minimum standards to ensure that advisors are sufficiently knowledgeable about these different practices. And I think that is absolutely critical. I mean, very often we talk about financial literacy when it comes to consumers, but I think what's even more important is making sure that advisors are knowledgeable and able to give good advice to consumers. And I think maybe addressing also the question about how to best disclose to consumers. And I agree that obviously there are some challenges associated with creating some kind of simple label for consumers in the key ID documents. But it is very critical, and we do have examples from other sectors like in energy or appliances, but also, for instance, in food, where simple labels have been created and they are working effectively for consumers. And I think some kind of simple disclosure label is critical to help guide consumers' decision making as it relates to the sustainability of investment products. But obviously, disclosure isn't enough, and we need to look at other tools, like, for instance, the eco label that has already been mentioned by Sébastien. And we need to urgently develop a European eco label for retail financial services products. But increasingly, we also need to look at regulating the products and not relying on disclosure too much. And the European Commission has, for instance, proposed in its sustainable finance strategy, looking at creating minimum standards for Article 8 funds. And I think that is a very sensible approach, because I think consumers, they do demand that when they want to invest in a sustainable way, they do want their products to have a minimum impact. And we see so many risks related to greenwashing. So I think developing minimum standards for sustainable investment products is something that should be addressed by the European Commission in the foreseeable future as well.
Thank you for that, Jasper. I was actually thinking perhaps we can bring in David again. Andrea, I leave you for a final round to comment on all of what you've heard, assuming you don't want to get into the debate at this point. David, maybe also picking up on what Seb said about default options and opting out. Jasper has just mentioned sustainable finance disclosure regulation. You mentioned it as well in the context of many different definitions out there. Is it an idea to fix the SFDR and to perhaps amend the Article 8 minimum standards? It's a debate that is ongoing. The German authorities in particular have been consulting on this. Is that one way to come to a joint minimum definition of what such products should be? And then to come back to Seb's call, those would be the default products. And if you would want a product that is Article 6 SFDR, sorry for the jargon for the listeners, then perhaps you need to opt out. And so I'll briefly clarify, Article 6 are products that do not make any specific sustainability claim. Article 8 are products that make a sustainability claim and therefore have to justify it to prevent greenwashing. And Article 9 are products that target a very specific sustainability outcome. David?
Yeah, sure. About the comparison of sustainability label or indicator and existing labels or indicators like in the energy sector or the building sector, I think it's not comparable. If I take a house, I have the house, it's in front of me. I know what it's made of. I can measure the thickness of the walls. I look at whether it's single glazing, double glazing. I know what's the energy used to heat up the house and so on. So I can give you a rough, but it's physics, right? We're talking about physical flows here. Indication of what will be the energy consumption and CO2 emissions caused by this house over a year. Now, taking this concept and applying it to investment and thinking that you can remotely get the same kind of granularity and precision when you have a fund investing in 100 different companies around the world with very different levels of transparency, reporting standard on ESG and so on, is, I think, misleading. That being said, there are things we know. We know whether the companies are investing in tobacco or not. They're making that. So this is something you could disclose because it's part of their existing reporting obligation. So there are some things that we could disclose as an industry to investors about the kind of companies we invest in and how we choose them. And that's, I think, would be an interesting way for SFDR to go towards, because SFDR is much more than that right at the moment. It's way more ambitious than this little disclosure I'm referring to. But that would be, I think, a first step and useful step in giving investors a sense of whether a product is more or less matching their own expectations, instead of trying to over-engineer some overall indicator of sustainability, which goes back to my previous point about complexity. Now, about SFDR, my feeling, I have no study about that, is we have never talked so much about greenwashing as since we created SFDR. And before SFDR, you had funds that didn't claim they were sustainable. They were being sold to investors as they were. And now, I read the report this morning, 2/3 of net inflows into investment funds in Europe in the third quarter of this year went to Article 8 and 9 products, 2/3 almost. So it seems that soon you will only be able to buy a product if it's either Article 8 or 9. And if you look at these products, especially the Article 8, I think they were called the same way and they existed in about the same form 2 years ago as they do today. So this is, as you said, this is something that is probably of concern. It probably needs to be worked upon, but I don't have a solution for that. What should be done with Article 8 products and criteria to avoid any misleading information. Because if we define a very tight and precise definition of what's in Article 8, what are the criteria, then what's the point of having Article 9, right? So you need to have some kind of granularity. And again, it's hard to define a minimum standard when there is no minimum standard. There is no commonly accepted standard amongst investors. So it's a bit of a stuck between a rock and a hard place, if you ask me.
Thank you for this elaboration and indeed for reminding us on the market developments, which show that the vast majority of investments in terms of asset under management are going into products that are Article 8 or 9 light or dark green under this Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, which in a way cynically is showing that the regulation is working, because for those products it is preventing greenwashing. But now perhaps we need to reconsider what is being imposed on those funds, and if I may use that word, tighten the screws on what they are actually disclosing, which again links to what Sébastien has said. Just checking the technical people, I think we have to assume that 𝗀𝗃 won't be able to join us to answer the questions. She is available, but she has technical issues, so that's really a shame. I cannot take the question that is in the Q&A, which is really targeted at her, unless one of the other panelists wants to come in and say something about how we can validate this data. I guess that would be again you, David, no? I mean, we see an emergence of an ESG rating industry, but are we also seeing the emergence of an ESG assurance industry that is actually verifying all the claims that are being made? Can you say something about that?
Yeah, sure. So ESG, environmental, social, governance. First of all, we're talking about completely different realities. Because when we talk about ESG, and if you listen back to everything that's been said today, we only talk about environmental stuff. We don't talk about social or governance, but it's E, S, and G. So on the environmental side, we're talking about physical flows, which can be measured, and these are the ones we've been measuring for the longest. So you have some emerging standard around greenhouse gas emissions measurements. In Europe, most companies we invest in have to disclose and get these figures audited, because they are part of the ETS scheme to exchange emission permits. So on the environmental side, I think we get somewhere where you have transparency and a form of standard in Europe and at some point also globally. But on the S and G, you can't just bundle everything together. The G is about things that we've had for ages, about board composition and how the kind of control mechanisms in place. So this is well standardized and communicated as well. So there the data exists. It's a matter of appreciating the data and assessing it and drawing conclusion in terms of sustainability from that data. So S, the social side, everything relating to supply chain, to working conditions, is where the biggest lack of data and standardization exists today. There are some initiatives we support to encourage companies through a standard template questionnaire to disclose once a year information about how they remunerate their people, how they employ them, how they monitor the supply chain, and so on. But there's still a lot to be done, really. And this what we are supposed, and we are asked now to tell you whether a company is sustainable or not. So data is a big challenge. And the fact that the data providers themselves currently are not subject to very close regulation, and the fact that they disagree amongst each other about really basic stuff is also interesting.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let's go to a final round of all the speakers. And if that's okay with you, Andrea, I would like to start with you. I hope you're able to reactivate your camera and your microphone. I'll give you a few seconds, because I think it would be very good for you to wrap up and sort of tell us what you think of the bit so far, and the points that the Commission is taking on board or is willing to consider for the big horizontal strategy next year.
Well, we're, as I said, I would repeat myself. We're evidence gathering, so we're considering anything. We haven't excluded anything, and I've taken good note of a lot of the points that have been made by Jasper, but all the other colleagues as well here. A lot of discussion has been on disclosures. Of course, we all also share the point on the need to avoid greenwashing and fully in line with what has been said. But of course, all this is, as David has pointed out, all this is not that easy to do, to achieve. We will look at all these suggestions, and I know that there is a lot of work already going on in this aspect. What surprised me a little bit was really this focus on disclosures, because of course also in our retail investment strategy, some comments we get is that actually disclosures aren't really that effective because retail investors don't really look at them very much. But obviously there are, I guess, all of these arguments are true to some extent, because they're very different retail investors. Some might not look at this at all, and then you have the advisors who are crucially important, and others might be more expert and more interested and more keen, and therefore they do look into this. So I'm fully in line with a lot of the points made by Jasper on training of financial advisors. This is clearly important, and I think colleagues are working on this already. They're looking at certificates. The disclosure we already discussed, access to independent comparison tools. Yes, that's I think this is also a very important aspect, because this is what consumers, retail investors would really be looking at. But again, then you have to have a kind of a relatively easy, simple measure. Inducements, that's of course always one of the big elephants in the room. What do we do with inducement? We are looking at this very, very carefully. We know that this is an important aspect. This is part of our study, and we are waiting. We're very keen on seeing the results of that, and I know many of you have also contributed to that study. Monitoring financial advisors, more ESMA guidance is also noted. Maybe one question that I would have was on the point on default options. How is that supposed to work? Maybe that's a bit of a stupid question, I don't know. But if you have a suitability assessment and you're actually asking people, so do you have preferences for a sustainability, yes or no? Where does that leave room for a default option? Because you're in principle supposed to say, do you want to invest sustainably or not? But maybe this is too simple. And then, of course, yeah, colleagues are working on the eco label. This has been delayed, unfortunately, but it's on our list to do. But of course, it's also linked with the taxonomy, and therefore some delays due to that. That's what I would want to say. As I said, I've taken good note of all the comments, and we will assess all that, of course, in line with good Commission standards. We have to do, and we will do better regulation. We follow better regulation guidance, and we'll have to impact assess all that.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for that. Jasper, if I give you another minute and a half, 2 minutes, can you perhaps also elaborate on the point that was just raised as regards with disclosure, perhaps not being the silver bullet? You've said before that we might have to have stronger rules, perhaps banning certain products. We've seen that discussion with PRIPS in complexity. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. And indeed, disclosure, it's an important tool for many retail investors. But there is a lot of evidence from studies from national competent authorities that, you know, many consumers, they do not take the information on board. They do not, you know, take into account disclosure information. And retail investors aren't necessarily always rational or have the time to take into account all of the different information that they need to consider when taking investment decisions. And so, you know, indeed, regulating products, I think, is very important. Beyond that, I think also, obviously, banning the payment of inducements to financial advisors is a key priority that BEUC has been campaigning for a long time. And you know, right at the moment, you know, commissions need to be disclosed to investors, but we have a lot of evidence that the consumers, they do not really take this information on board when taking investment decisions, and that disclosure has a limited capacity to change their behavior. So I think my concluding point would be that really, if you want to make sure that financial advice is in the best interest of clients, then an inducement ban is the way to go.
Point taken, Jasper. Sébastien, Andrea also mentioned default options. Can you pick that up in your concluding remarks?
Yes, that's a very good question about why we should ask retail investors if they want to invest sustainably or not, while we at the same time propose sustainable investment to become a default option. In fact, there are a couple of different issues. The first one is that we don't know yet if this new requirement for financial advisors will really work. We have no evidence yet. It didn't start yet, really. We know there's a huge lack of sustainability expertise from financial advisors. There's also a big concern that the MiFID II and the IDD delegated acts are not granular. And there's currently no guidance from FISMA, etc. So there is a risk, in our view, there's a risk that, in fact, this act may not change much, and financial advisors may still be able to sell business as usual products because they may not ask the good questions to the retail investors, or ask them in a way that the retail investors are not really able to answer if it's too technical, or use the responses in a way that they can still sell their products already on the shelf and not do efforts to propose other financial products. So we have concerns that this may not be enough. And second, as I mentioned, there's already a very, very strong evidence from many different studies that there's an overwhelming majority of retail investors who do want to invest in a sustainable way. So then the next question is, what does this mean for them? And this is where we need more granular information. This is where David is right. It's not a very easy issue. There are different questions. And how do you move forward with this? And this is also where we need to move forward in terms of minimum sustainability requirements for any sustainable ESG green funds, or sustainably denominated more generally, to make sure there are different elements that are taken into account for making sure these funds are not greenwashing and have truly impact, positive impact on the real economy, be it on climate, be it on labor, be it on biodiversity or whatever. And this needs to be assessed in a more granular way. So this is where it's still extremely relevant to ask retail investors their preferences, because we will need to go more into the details, only asking whether they want to invest sustainably or not. Actually, we already have the response from many studies, as mentioned. It's already very strong, and they can still opt out. But then we need to discuss, to clarify more what they mean, what they require. And this is where there's more work to be done.
Sébastien?
This is where we expect a lot from to improve Article 8, 9 SFDR minimum requirements.
Yeah. David, any final thought? I know you've come in just now, but go ahead if you want.
Yeah, I agree with what Sébastien said, that investors should be asked what they're expecting. That's the only way for us to know how to structure products that answer their needs. And we should start low, not low in terms of aspiration, in terms of the complexity of what we ask. First ask, do you want to invest in tobacco, in weapon manufacturers, and other activities, and then move on Do you want to dedicate a portion of your investment to a certain activity or certain objective, like developing renewable energy? But always bearing in mind at the same time that we are investing, and investment decisions have an impact on financial performance. So if you say, I only want to invest all my assets in renewable, and tomorrow there is a crash because of market volatility or whatever, in the share of companies making wind turbines, the investor will be the one left out dry because of that. So any advice based on sustainability should not be done without any consideration at all in terms of its financial impact for the investor, his pension, his savings, and so on.
But perhaps diversification is the solution there, and this is of course what the better comparability of products allows, if you can compare different asset classes and different products out there. Thank you all for joining this panel. Thank you to the audience. For those of you so interested in this discussion that you want to go on it, in about 28 minutes from now, we have another workshop starting with Sébastien and colleagues from Jasper and Andrea from the DG FISMA Retail Finance unit. But we have also other very interesting parallel workshops, so I don't want to monopolize the space. Make your choice, have a good break, and we hope to see you again in a bit less than half an hour. Thank you to all the speakers, and see you soon.
Thank you.